Okay, we're live Tuesday, September 7th with Shanda King from the West Virginia Department of Agriculture, and you're the apiarist. Did I say that right?
Yes, you did.
Okay.
Actually, most people don't. So yeah,
Yeah.
good job.
Why don't you fill us in on what you do, what your duties are, and
Um,
I
in
know
the
you're a beekeeper, right?
I am a beekeeper first and foremost. I was a beekeeper before I had this job, and I'm still a beekeeper. I personally run 31 colonies, but for the Department of Agriculture, I we work with beekeepers closely across the state, and we do inspections of colonies for colony health. When a beekeeper needs to sell bees, they need an inspection. So we need to make sure that the bees that are going out there to the local beekeepers are healthy bees. And then after those inspections are done, is my favorite part of the year, and that's working with new beekeepers and education because beekeeping is a very steep learning curve. So they need a lot of help. And then reaching out and helping them in that manner kind of lowers that learning curve a little
So when you reach out to the two questions,
bit.
you said that you inspect the hives before they sell the bees.
Mm-hmm.
What about the incoming bees into West Virginia?
Absolutely. Any bees that are coming into West Virginia, whoever is importing them is supposed to apply for an entry permit, which is free. It doesn't cost anything. But we just need to make sure we know that these bees that are coming in have been inspected for contagious diseases on the other end. So, say if we were importing them from someone was bringing in 20 colonies from Georgia, we need to see a health inspection certificate from their Department of Agriculture on that end.
So you work hand in hand with the Department of Agriculture and other
Absolutely.
states.
Absolutely. And
Um,
other state apiarists.
okay. Well, does West Virginia? Are you the only one in West Virginia working for the Ag Department? The only apiarist?
I am the only state apiarist, and under me, I have 4 seasonal inspectors that work seasonally because it's such a tremendous inspection load that I can't do it all by
Right.
myself. So, from April till it gets too cold to inspect, we have 4 other seasonals.
So when you say the new beekeepers, you assist with education. I mean, how do you have classes, or do you go out and help them individually, or
In West Virginia, it's required to register your bee colonies, and that's just
even if you have one?
even if you have one.
Okay.
But the only reason for that is so that we know where they are in case there's ever a contagious disease outbreak, so we can mitigate that outbreak. When during the registration process, you can request an inspection, and if you indicate that you want an inspection as a new beekeeper, we will schedule it and kind of just we'll go through a hive inspection with you. And as we go through the hive and look at the different frames and things, the new beekeeper can ask questions, or we just talk about what we're seeing. And then they have established that contact with an inspector so that as questions arise throughout the year, we're able to help them and answer them. I take a tremendous amount of phone calls and answer questions via text, pictures. We can tell a lot from a photo, believe it or not.
Is there has there been an increase in new beekeepers, or is it just pretty much every year about the same amount of people?
It's increasing. It's West Virginia is primarily, I would call it the hobbyist level beekeeper. So we're not talking about
Commercial.
commercial or sideliner, which is the medium level.
Okay.
Sideliners have about 200. We have about 3 commercials in West Virginia only, and they run up to about 2,000 colonies apiece. But most of them are hobbyists, so they're going to have less than several hundred.
Right.
So because of that, I think in West Virginia, spending that time in education and working with them, it helps bring up that survival of
Yeah.
bees colonies because once they realize what struggles they're going to face, how to deal with them, then they're better off with that survival of bee
Do you ever
colonies.
have people that think they want to do it, and then you
Absolutely.
got to talk to them, and they
I would say about year 3, if you make it through year 3, you're either going to be a beekeeper or you're going to give up.
one or two. So how is this past summer compared? How do you think it's compared in West Virginia across the state for bees compared to other summers, or is it pretty
um,
typical? Or
well, 2 winters ago, we had high losses. In West Virginia, um, the vast majority of our colonies are lost across the winter. as bees go into their what's called a cluster. So it's kind of like a semi-hibernation kind of state. Um, but if you make it through the winter, then new beekeepers typically start in the spring. But this spring was a very good honey production year, most of the state. Um, and then most beekeepers start pulling their honey, June, July. Then we went into a really bad dearth because when we got that drought, um, we have been seeing since I've had this job the most losses over the summer from starvation. Oh. So if we're in a drought, plants can't produce nectar, and if the beekeeper's not paying attention, the hive can quickly starve. They eat a tremendous amount of food. During that time is when they have they're raising the most brood and the most young bees in the colony. So if they don't have enough resources, they're very prone to starvation.
So the super dry July probably was not good.
It was very hard on pollinators. And also, but it's picked back up. So now that we're seeing the fall flowers, the wingstem and the goldenrod, that's our final flow for the beekeeping honey year. And once that's over, beekeepers need to, they're preparing for winter kind of right now, starting. And if they determine that the colony isn't heavy enough, if it doesn't have enough resources, they'll have to feed them in order for them to have enough food to make it through to the next.
Is that what I'm seeing? I've seen lately on Twitter and Facebook a lot of people saying that their bees are eating a lot of sugar.
Yes, that is exactly what you're talking about. New beekeepers, they have to feed more than established beekeepers because they don't have all the wax built up in the colony. But also regular beekeepers this year, most beekeepers, it's probably around 65 pounds they want their colonies to weigh prior to going into winter, and they got to make sure they feed them and they finish capping it and everything before it gets too cold. So we're talking about before like late October.
You know the term, it escapes me right now, but when the bees go and they go up in a tree and you have to get them
swarming.
Has there been an increase in that this year? It seems like there were an awful lot of people talking about it.
It was a tremendous swarm season, and that's normal. I would like people to know that's completely normal for bees to do that. It's part of their life cycle. As the colony comes out of winter and the queen starts laying more and more, and then it gets kind of crowded in the colony. So the natural tendency is for them to swarm, and that's the old queen will leave the hive with about half of the bees. And so she's leaving that entire hive and all of its resources to her daughter. Okay. So it's how the colony divides and makes two. And if anyone ever sees a swarm, it's a ball of bees. It's hanging in a tree, on a fence, on the side of your house. The Department of Agriculture maintains a list that for beekeepers who are willing to collect swarms and beekeepers who are also willing to do cutouts. And a cutout is when bees move into siding or someone's house or their.
That's not uncommon.
It's not. It's if the swarm isn't collected, it's going to move somewhere, and that's why if you see a swarm, it's important to call a beekeeper before it gets to the stage where it's going to move into someone's house, and then it becomes more of a problem.
I would think that if you had trouble for whatever reason getting hold of the Department of Ag, that the extension service would be.
The extension.
And I know we got our 911. We gave them a list of beekeepers in different areas around Wood County.
You can call 911. You can call the extension. You can call the Ag Department.
And there's no charge.
There's no charge. Facebook's a really good place. Also, a lot of the community pages to tag something. I mean, people start tagging beekeepers, and it's a good way to get a hold of someone. But it is important because if that swarm is allowed to move, it does have an 85% chance of dying by the next spring, and because honeybees do suffer a lot of disease.
And they're not native.
They're not native, right. But a well-managed colony that you manage without disease does not harm the native bees. And I know that's you see that more and more in the media now, but very conscientious beekeepers keep their honeybees in very good health.
What and tonight the city council is going to be talking about hopefully passing an integrated pest management program, which basically says that as a city we're going to not use, I'm not going to miss it, neonicotinoids.
Yep.
Not bad.
Pesticides. Not bad.
Basically, bad chemicals
Right.
that interfere with the bees. I mean, is that an important thing? Do you think that we start
It
moving away
is.
from those? Or
It is, and there are a lot of things you can do in that integrated pest management, which you're going to start addressing. And I did write some of the things down because I knew I wouldn't remember them all. Um, you don't want to use pesticides as a preventative measure. So when you have a problem, then you address it. Not, I'm going to use this to prevent a problem down into the future. I mean, I think as
for instance, treated seeds.
exactly,
I'm going to plant treated seeds because I might get.
I might get it.
Right.
Why would you do that? Why would you uh, try to address a problem that doesn't exist?
Right.
And then when you do have the problem, target the problem. You don't like if the problem is isolated within your garden or within your flower or whatever your landscaping, target the problem area, not widespread treating across the whole area. And then you should also consider the pesticide that you're choosing because some are more friendly for pollinators than others, and also target their application time. A lot of times they'll say to target late afternoon instead of during the day, so when the pollinators are not as active. So you can limit any time you're dealing with any sort of chemical. There's two things to consider when you're dealing with pollinators: the toxicity of the chemical, but that's not all because you need to consider the exposure. So what is in your control? Those go both in your control. You can choose the chemical, you can choose a less toxic choice, but you can also choose when to apply it so that you are not exposing the pollinators to as much chemical exposure. Like when a plant is blooming is the worst time to apply a chemical because pollinators are attracted to those flowers.
Okay. Everything else.
Let's see.
That looks like a long list.
Also, when you are applying, there's always this range of dosage, and you should always choose the lower dosage.
Okay.
As opposed to the higher dosage. Um, you say, okay, you should try to choose liquid chemicals over dust chemicals because a lot of bees and pollinators think that the dust is pollen, and that can poison a colony. So making those choices. You don't want to apply any, even if it's a liquid spray, don't apply it when it's windy because then you're going to get drift onto potentially something else that's flowering over here. Maybe I'm applying it to this plant and there's no flowers, but it's drifting over here to this plant that does have flowers. Right. So be careful with that. Also, you should always follow the directions on the labels, and you should rinse your pesticide tank so that you don't get cross exposure to them. And what I really like to tell people is even though it's not required by law, it is nice to let beekeepers know. If you know a beekeeper that's near you, and give them some heads up so that they know what you're doing in case they want to try to maybe close in their colony while you're applying, or it's a nice thing. It's a neighborly thing to do.
And there's a lot of the people that we're dealing with are homeowners and have small gardens, and I think that there's probably alternatives.
Right.
To the chemicals. There's different ways of doing things that hopefully we're going to, through the Bee City, get the word out and let people know.
And that's exactly what my next point is education is a large portion of it.
Right.
Is letting people know their choices and that there are other safer choices for pollinators because a lot of people don't even think about it.
Right.
And I tell people one of the big problems that we're fighting for pollinators in this country is lawns, and people think they have to have this immaculate, perfect lawn, which is actually a pollinator desert. And it didn't always used to be that way. But people used to welcome dandelions and clover into their yards, and it's part of that. It's changing people's mindset about things and letting them know that, well, a clover is better because there's something to eat there.
Right. Well, we've about used up our time.
We could probably sit here and talk.
We could probably. I know we could. Do you have anything at all you'd like to add? I mean, you're such a resource for us. That, we're lucky to have you in West Virginia.
Number one, I thank you for letting me have this access to people and letting them know about honeybees. If you see a swarm, find a beekeeper. Don't spray the bees. They're not there to set up house in your bush. They're going to move on, but finding a beekeeper to come and get them.
How long do they usually stay in the tree?
It could be anywhere from 30 minutes to several days.
Okay.
So sometimes you'll call and they've
They're
already
gone.
moved on, but beekeepers are aware of that
Okay.
and they know the risks. But if they're in your house, please reach out. Don't try to kill them. Um, Saving the pollinators is a good thing.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Marty.
We appreciate it.